Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're undertaking a long, thoughtful, and maybe a slightly uncomfortable look at one of Jesus's most provocative parables.
Mhm.
It's a story that, on the surface, it sounds like a pretty simple lesson about economics, but it turns out to be an absolute masterclass on the internal workings of the human heart.
And the startling, sometimes offensive generosity of God.
Yes, exactly.
That's precisely right. This is the parable of the workers in the vineyard, and you find it in Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. It's brief, but it is laser-focused.
Yeah.
Our source material points out that this story really exposes something fundamentally stubborn in the human heart.
Okay, let's unpack that. When you say stubbornness, what are we talking about? I'm guessing it's that innate drive we all have to keep score.
That's it.
We carry these internal ledgers everywhere we go. We measure our service, we, calculate our hours, we compare outcomes, and inevitably we feel like we're deserving when our column on that ledger looks a little longer or more impressive than someone else's.
And this story puts a mirror right up to that deep, instinctive comparison mechanism.
Right.
It does, and that instinct is precisely what Jesus was addressing. This parable wasn't told in a vacuum. It's a direct and I think profound response to a very human question from one of the disciples.
From Peter.
From Peter, yeah.
Yeah.
Having just watched Jesus promise these incredible blessings to those who follow him, Peter essentially asks the question that's on everyone's mind. We have left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us?
And I find that exchange so relatable. I mean, Peter's standing there, he's looking at the sacrifices they've all made, leaving their jobs, their homes, their families, and he's basically saying, hey, we showed up first.
We were here from the beginning.
We put in the hard hours, so what is our compensation package going to look like compared to, someone who joins up later?
It's a really honest, if maybe a little anxious question about seniority and reward.
It's absolutely honest. And Jesus, being a faithful and loving king, gives him an immediate assurance of a profound reward.
He does, yeah. The disciples will sit on thrones judging Israel. Everyone who follows him will inherit eternal life. The reward is certain. But then, immediately after that promise, and right before he tells the story, he puts this really serious warning in the doorway that frames the entire parable.
What's the warning?
He says, many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first.
That is a challenging statement. It suggests that our seniority or our effort or even our early commitment might kind of counterintuitively become a spiritual tripping hazard if our heart isn't right.
Yes.
It's almost as if Jesus is saying, be careful what you demand because your demand might just disqualify you from receiving my gift.
That is the crucial tension. And that's really our mission for this deep dive. We're trying to look past our own ledgers and really understand and trust the owner's character. We need to correct that pride, that instinct that measures our worth by our tenure.
The idea that because we've been here longer, we are inherently more deserving of grace.
Exactly. It's a corrosive idea. We are exploring a story where, yes, the wages are justly paid, but the stunning, overflowing generosity of grace is so intense that it actually risks spoiling the joy of those who arrived early.
To really feel the shock and the tension of this parable, I think we have to establish the world is taking place in.
We do.
We need to grasp two foundational things. First, what the vineyard itself represented to Jesus' Jewish audience, and second, just the desperate reality of a day laborer's life.
The setting is absolutely critical, particularly the symbolism of the vineyard. When Jesus mentions a vineyard in the ancient Near East, especially in a Jewish teaching, he isn't just talking about agriculture.
Yeah.
He's invoking a profound, a deeply established covenant picture known throughout Israel's scriptures.
That's the classic metaphor for Israel, right?
Yeah.
The vineyard of God.
Precisely. And the best place to see this, which the source material references, is in the prophet Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 5, the beloved who is God sings this devastating song about a vineyard. He planted it on a fertile hillside, cleared it of stones, built a watchtower, fenced it in.
He did everything right.
Everything right, expecting it to yield good grapes. But what did it yield? Only foul, wild, sour grapes.
And Isaiah immediately interprets that painful disappointment for the people.
He does. Isaiah concludes, in no uncertain terms, that the vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the sour grapes represented their failure to produce what God was looking for.
Which was what?
He looked for justice but saw bloodshed. He looked for righteousness but heard cries of distress and violence. So when Jesus opens this story, the audience immediately understands the setting. The owner, he stands for God. The field of his concern is his people, his covenant community, and the purposes he wants to accomplish through them.
So we established this isn't just a story about a farmer, it's a story about the king of the covenant managing his kingdom. Now let's bring in the workers. The source material really emphasizes the extreme vulnerability of the day laborer. Why were they in such a desperate spot?
Imagine the economic situation in first-century Galilee or Judea.
Right.
These day laborers, the ergatai, they were among the most precarious members of society. They owned no land, they had no savings, no fixed employment. Every single morning, they gathered at dawn in the agora, the marketplace,
Just hoping.
hoping desperately to be chosen by a foreman or a landowner. They literally lived from sunrise to sunset.
And their family's survival hinged entirely on that single day's pay.
Exactly. A denarius, which the owner agrees to pay the first group, was not an extravagance. It was considered a fair minimum wage for a full day of hard work.
So it's what you needed to feed your family.
It's the basic necessity to buy flour, oil, maybe some firewood. And here is the critical detail that's tied to the law. The Mosaic Law recognized this vulnerability. Deuteronomy 24.15 required employers to pay that wage promptly, specifically before sunset, because the worker is poor and is counting on it. They couldn't wait until the next morning.
That detail adds such an intense, visceral anxiety to that marketplace scene. Every hour that ticked by wasn't just wasted time. It was a tightening knot of fear for the family waiting at home.
It was suffocating pressure. Think about it. The sun is rising higher, the heat of the day is becoming intense, and you are still standing there, unchosen.
Yeah.
To be overlooked at the third hour, that's 9 a.m., or the sixth hour at noon, or the ninth hour at 3 p.m., all meant shrinking hope. But to still be waiting at the 11th hour, just 60 minutes before the workday officially ended, but that didn't just mean a temporary job loss.
No, that meant your family wasn't eating tonight.
It meant the certainty of empty bowls. It meant the devastating shame of returning to your wife and children with absolutely nothing, having failed the most basic provision test.
I can just picture it. I mean, Jesus' audience could picture these men, their clothes all dusty, standing there with their hands nervously rubbing together as the sun starts to drop toward the horizon.
They felt it keenly. And this visceral context is what makes the owner's motivation so central to the story. He is not acting like a typical capitalist. He's demonstrating compassion that completely transcends basic contractual logic.
And we see that compassion in his repeated trips to the marketplace.
Yes, the sources highlight that the owner's actions show an intertwining of two things: urgency and compassion. Urgency, because the harvest is abundant and it needs to be brought in before the grapes rot on the vine.
Right, there's a practical need.
There is, but also compassion, because he keeps returning, looking not just for strong hands to maximize his yield, but for unused hands. He sees the men still standing there at 9, noon, 3, and finally at 5 in the afternoon, the 11th hour.
And when he asks those men at the 11th hour why they're standing there, they give him the most heartbreaking answer, don't they?
They do.
They aren't lazy. They say, because no one has hired us.
It's a confession of defeat, not idleness. They've been willing to work all day, but they were simply passed over. And when pay time finally arrives, this owner completely subverts the cultural assumption.
Which would have been what? A sliding scale?
A strict sliding scale. 12 hours of work gets 12 times the pay of 1 hour. But the owner, he decides for a different math. It's the math of a specific promise kept to the early workers, an overwhelming, unearned grace given to the very last. And that decision, that sets the stage for the dramatic tension that just explodes at the pay window.
Okay, so let's walk slowly through the narrative itself, focusing on the specific agreements, the shocking payment sequence, and then the owner's really clear defense of his actions.
We have to start with the agreement itself. The story opens, because the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard.
The very first group is hired at dawn. And note, the agreement is explicit, it's ironclad, and it's just a denarius for the day. That establishes the contract, and in that culture, it also establishes the standard of justice. They agreed to the terms, they started working.
Now contrast that with the latecomers. The owner keeps coming back 3rd, 6th, 9th, and finally the 11th hour. To these later groups, the agreement is much more open-ended. He simply promises them, I will pay you whatever is right.
Ah, so that's a key difference.
It's a huge difference. This flexibility is another early demonstration of the owner's character.
Yeah.
He operates on his own definition of rightness, which, it turns out, includes compassion.
So the first group has a contract based on measurable work. The later groups have a promise based purely on the owner's trustworthiness and his mercy.
That distinction is key. It absolutely is.
Hmm.
Now, the pivotal moment. Evening comes, the workday is over, And the owner gives the foreman a very specific, and I would argue deliberately strategic instruction.
Yeah.
He says, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first.
Paying the last first. That's where the drama starts. It sets up an expectation among the early workers. The source material notes that the men hired at the 11th hour, who were, barely sweaty.
Their hands weren't even calloused.
Right. They come forward and receive a full denarius, a whole day's wage for maybe 60 minutes of light labor.
Think about the physical scene. The 12-hour men are waiting. They're tired, dusty, thirsty, and they're watching this unfold. They see the 1-hour men receive the full coin, and instantaneously, human expectation just takes over.
Oh, yeah. The wheels start turning.
They look at the coin, they look at their 12 hours of toil, and they mentally start calculating the multiplier. If 1 hour is worth a denarius, surely we who endured the full sun, the full burden, the full heat will get 10, maybe 12 denarius. This is the exact moment where gratitude dies and calculation reigns supreme.
Their focus has completely shifted. Their expectations shifted from the certainty of the contract, that single denarius they agreed to the speculative riches of the comparison, what the others received as a gift.
And then, the painful anticlimax. When the early workers finally get to the pay window, they receive their single agreed-upon denarius. They weren't cheated, their contract was fulfilled perfectly, but they were deeply spiritually offended because they were paid equally.
So the complaint they lodge is not about injustice toward themselves,
Yeah.
but about equality being extended to others. They grumble specifically, "You have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work in the heat of the day."
Exactly.
I want to pause on that point for a moment because this is where the human heart really rebels against grace. What exactly did the first workers want the owner to do when they complained? Did they want their own pay raised, or did they want the latecomers' pay lowered?
I think they wanted the latecomers' pay lowered, or at the very least they wanted a visible demonstration of distinction and superiority.
Yeah.
They didn't just want justice for themselves, which they already had. They wanted meritocracy enforced upon others.
They wanted grace removed from the equation.
Completely. So that their seniority and their effort could prevail as the singular measure of worth. The complaint is pure envy, just wrapped up tightly in the language of earned justice.
And the owner's response is fascinating. He calls the grumbler friend. That sounds a little, passive-aggressive, a gentle but very firm dismissal. What did the sources suggest about that? Was it affection or was it a rebuke?
It carries both. There's affection, but also a sharp reminder of the power dynamic. In the Gospels, when Jesus calls Judas friend, it's a term of familiar address, but it's loaded with tragic irony and rebuke.
I see.
Here, the owner is saying, friend, look at me. Have I wronged you? I am not being unfair to you. He forces the worker back to the contract. You agree to the denarius. The rebuke is subtle. You are complaining about someone else's blessing, not about your own injury.
And then comes the truly piercing question, the rhetorical sword that cuts right to the deepest motive. Are you envious because I am generous?
And that question reframes the entire grievance instantly. It clarifies that the issue was never the owner's justice, which was fully satisfied. The issue was the worker's pride, which was offended by someone else's undeserved good fortune.
So the parable isn't about a broken contract.
Not at all. It's about a generosity so lavish, so disproportionate, that it exposes the envy residing in a proud heart that prefers comparison and leverage over simple gratitude.
And the whole story ends by repeating the original warning, which now has this terrifying resonance. So the last will be first and the first will be last.
That brings us full circle, back to Peter's initial question about reward. The story answers him definitively, but it does so without scolding his faithful service. The reward is absolutely guaranteed. They will receive eternal life and their hundredfold. This parable makes it crystal clear. The distribution and the mechanism of reward are governed entirely by the king. His grace operates on a ledger that does not mimic human spreadsheets, and envy is absolutely not allowed to set the rules for joy in his kingdom.
This shift into the theological realm is so important. The sources state that the owner's absolute freedom, his sovereignty, is the very axis upon which this whole parable turns.
It is the absolute center, because it defines grace. The owner's penetrating question, don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money, is not just a financial statement. It is a declaration of divine sovereignty.
Right.
And it challenges the human belief that goodness must operate on a system of measurable meritocracy. Grace, by its very definition, can't be earned. It's entirely at the owner's disposal.
And the discomfort that creates for us is immediate. We like predictable systems. We like knowing that if we put X amount of effort in, we get Y reward out.
We want to control it.
When the owner acts outside of those predictable metrics, we feel a loss of control and we label it unfairness.
Precisely. We fundamentally misunderstand grace because we want to turn it into a higher form of wage. If we can control how much generosity the owner dispenses based on our effort, then we can control our status relative to our neighbor. The source material connects this specific idea of freedom back to the very foundational character of God revealed in the Old Testament.
Can you tell us more about that scriptural foundation?
This is rooted in the identity God proclaimed to Moses. When Moses asked to see God's glory, God proclaimed his name and character, saying, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion.
That's from Exodus.
Exodus 33. And Paul repeats it in Romans 9. The owner is sovereign over how and when and to whom he dispenses his goodness. He is utterly free. He is not indebted to our expectations.
So the parable is this powerful illustration of the delicate balance between God's justice, which is satisfied by the contract, and his overwhelming generosity, which is celebrated as the bonus.
It shows that his generosity surpasses his justice without ever negating it. The first workers received exactly what they were due. They were treated justly. The last workers received a gift. They were treated graciously.
So nobody was shorted.
No one was shorted. Many were abundantly blessed. The owner's books are perfectly balanced, but they contain an overflow that human accountants find offensive.
I think this is where the critique of entitlement really comes in. Who is Jesus primarily targeting with this reversal, this first will be last idea?
The primary target, historically, was entitlement assumptions within Israel, especially the spiritual leadership, the Pharisees, and the teachers of the law.
Of course.
They had labored the longest under the covenant and the law. They were tempted to believe they were due the highest rank and the greatest blessings. By virtue of their long tenure, their early call, their meticulous obedience to all the religious structures.
It was seniority turning into arrogance.
Exactly. They saw themselves as the 12-hour men and everyone else, the Gentiles, the tax collectors, the sinners. They were the 11th hour layabouts. And Jesus announces in this parable the owner's right to summon highly unlikely candidates.
Like the despised tax collectors who responded to the gospel.
Right, or even by extension the Gentiles, the people who had no history with the covenant whatsoever, and make them equal to the long-serving spiritual elite simply by grace.
This principle really begins to hint at the coming unity of the church, where seniority and ethnic origin would just cease to be the measuring stick for favor.
It's a leveling mechanism designed to promote humility and destroy boasting. The mystery of the church, Jew and Gentile united as one new man was not fully revealed yet, but the foundational principle is being established. Entrance into the kingdom is not by works, so that no one can boast.
From Ephesians.
Yes. The king's generosity is boundless, and no human entitlement, no religious seniority, no generational fidelity can fence it in.
And that concept also extends into the future, as the source material discusses, looking ahead to the final gathering of God's people.
Yeah, the parable has a future gesture. It reassures us that the owner is still active, still calling, even late in history's day. It references future gatherings in the tribulation period, when many late responders will come into the kingdom.
What are we talking about there?
We see figures like the 144,000 sealed witnesses from the tribes of Israel, the ministry of the two witnesses, and the angelic proclamation of the eternal gospel to every nation. You see it in Revelation.
So these are people who respond to the call of God late in the day of world history.
And this parable assures us that their entrance too will be a gift of grace, not a wage for hours logged. They will not be second-class citizens in the kingdom. And crucially, those who came early, like the faithful disciples, will be satisfied by their own guaranteed reward, not diminished by the blessing extended to the latecomers.
That's a critical point. Our fear is that if someone else is blessed, it must mean less for us.
And the owner's table is not finite. His generosity doesn't require scarcity.
So how does this purify our doctrine of eternal reward? Because we know rewards are real, Scripture guarantees them.
We have to hold those truths in tension. Matthew 16 promises the Son of Man will reward each person according to what they have done, and faithful service earns crowns.
Right. Paul talks about it. Peter talks about it.
They all do. The parable doesn't deny reward. It clarifies its nature.
Okay, so what is the true nature of the reward?
The rewards, the crowns, are not trophies of ego or platforms for comparison. They are acknowledgments of grace at work in the servant's life. The moment we start measuring our reward against someone else's, we turn genuine merit into leverage. and we reestablished the human spreadsheet system that the owner's generosity sought to overthrow.
So everything is tied back to his grace.
Every single wage, every bonus, every crown is tied back to his promise and his grace. And that protects the joy, satisfaction, and humility of the entire vineyard. Our reward is what he grants, not what we coerce.
This moves us into the most practical section. If this parable is a corrective, what specific spiritual lessons does it demand of us today? The sources suggest the very first lesson is adopting the habit of gratitude as the cure for the envy this story exposes.
The immediate danger that tripped the first workers was exchanging thanksgiving for arithmetic.
I like that phrasing.
They had been hired at dawn, they had a contract secured, their family was going to be fed. They started the day with enormous relief, but by sunset they had completely forgotten their initial gratitude. Why?
Because they were looking sideways at the 1-hour men.
Exactly. They focused entirely on the disparity, not on the sheer undeserved fact that they were hired at all, when so many others had no work.
That's the core personal application then for you, the listener. We must constantly, actively remember our own undeserved hire.
Yes. The source reminds us that before Christ, we were not just waiting in the marketplace. We were without hope and without God in the world. We were condemned by our sin, yet brought near by his blood.
So if the owner had never come to the marketplace at all?
None of us would have worked or eaten or rejoiced eternally.
So the practical shift is profound. Daily, intentional gratitude takes the wages, the blessings we receive, and it turns them into worship, rather than using them as fuel for comparison and resentment.
Which naturally leads to the second lesson. We have to refuse the toxic habit of comparison. Comparison is the thief of joy because, by definition, it edits grace out of the picture and forces us back into a system of meritocracy.
We see a classic example of this failure later with Peter, even after the resurrection. He's walking with the Lord, and he points at the Apostle John and asks, "Lord, what about this man?" It's the same instinct.
What's his package going to look like compared to mine?
Right.
And Jesus shuts that down immediately with such clarity. What is that to you? You must follow me. The Vineyard parable is saying the exact same thing across centuries. Stop looking at your neighbor's assignment, their platform, their pay, their spiritual gifts.
Just keep your eyes on the owner.
Keep your eyes fixed on the owner's face and your specific job in the row you are standing in.
So what are some practical steps from the source material that help a person stop comparing? It's an instinct, it's not an easy switch to flip.
No, you have to be intentional.
Yeah.
You have to actively create boundaries for information intake. The comparison happens when we start consuming information that allows us to build that comparison spreadsheet. What car they drive, what title they hold, what ministry they run, how many spiritual victories they seem to have logged.
So you have to stop listening to that noise.
You have to. And the spiritual discipline required is redirecting your focus. When the instinct to compare arises, we have to ask Paul's challenging question. What do you have that you did not receive?
And the only sane, humble answer to that is nothing.
Nothing. That immediately drains boasting of its fuel.
We also have to reshape our view of latecomers, those who come to faith later in life or, those who seem to receive tremendous blessings with what looks like minimal effort.
Yes, the compassion element of the parable is so vital here. Remember, some arrived at 5 in the afternoon, not because they slept the day away, but because no one had hired them. They were available, willing, and anxious.
So when grace finds them,
our response should never be suspicion. Does it really work? But unqualified celebration.
We need to honor the owner's heart.
Exactly. When we align our heart with the owner's, we celebrate the fact that his generosity continues to bring people into the vineyard at all hours and from all backgrounds. The owner continues to gather workers when and where he pleases, demonstrating his constant purpose even when the original stewards, like Israel's unfaithful leaders, whom Jesus discusses in the very next chapter, prove unfaithful.
This also informs how we redefine the nature of our labor. The owner acknowledged that the first men bore the burden of the work in the heat of the day. Long obedience is real, hidden faithfulness matters, and labor is often hard.
It absolutely matters. Jesus guarantees a reward even for the smallest act of service, for a cup of cold water given in his name. The difficulty is affirmed, but the motivation must be pure.
And what's the danger if the motivation isn't pure?
The danger is that the point of labor stops being love for the king and becomes leverage over the king. The moment our work becomes currency to buy status or seniority, resentment ferments and worship sours.
So what's the model then?
The true model is Paul, who worked harder than anyone else, yet he said, "By the grace of God, I am what I am, yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me." The work is simply God's grace powerfully working through us.
So finally, what does this parable offer to the person who is genuinely weary or who has served faithfully for decades and maybe feels overlooked or just anxious about fairness in their own lives?
It brings a calm, profound assurance, anchored firmly in the owner's character. For those worried about fairness, the owner never pays less than he pledged. He guarantees reward 100 times as much, plus eternal life, for all who sacrifice for him.
He keeps his promises.
He keeps his promises. The owner keeps books with a generosity that truly embarrasses human calculators. The ultimate spiritual counsel is this: trust his character when you cannot compute his choices. He gives what is right. He delights to give more.
And the final, most hopeful note is that the king has not finished hiring. The marketplace is still open.
Not at all. The 11th hour call still goes out. This story invites the weary soul, the person who thinks they're too late or too flawed, to hope. Grace still pays a denarius at dusk. Think of the thief on the cross who heard the promise of paradise in his final hour. God is still working 11th hour awakenings, bringing hands long idle into the joy of the vineyard. No one who comes at the owner's call will ever find him stingy at the table.
This has been a necessary and, I think, a profound deep dive. The parable of the workers is clearly not about simple human fairness. It's a masterclass in the owner's heart and the proper posture of the disciple.
It functions to quiet envy by celebrating divine generosity. It corrects the deep human temptation toward entitlement by highlighting the absolute priority of promise and grace.
And it steadies the faithful.
It does. It ensures their long service doesn't devolve into a vehicle for pride or comparison.
The ultimate call, then, for you is to stand in the vineyard with clean hands and a quiet heart, to serve the owner without bargaining, and to trust his generous nature without comparing yourself to the person standing next to you.
And we must always remember to listen for that healing question directed at us. Are you envious because I am generous? Our only faithful and truly joyful response should be the worship of a debtor who has been made rich purely by grace.
That posture of humility and thanksgiving brings us back to the central truth that really anchors our entire understanding of the vineyard, found in Ephesians 2, verses 8 and 9.
The Apostle Paul summarizes the entire mechanism of the kingdom here, and he provides both the comfort and the warning. He says, "For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast."
That passage ensures that everything we receive, our salvation, our hire, our every blessing, and our ultimate reward, is a gift. And that fact alone prevents any human boasting or any basis for comparison, ensuring that the last will be first and the first will be utterly satisfied by the sheer glory of the owner's generous character.
May you walk in the security of that generous gift today, trusting the promise and rejoicing in the compassion of the owner who hired you.
Go deeper, friend. We'll talk to you next time.